When I was 12 years old, I had a little bit of a snowboarding mishap. I went up to the ski hill with a couple of friends of mine, and we were doing some runs, and I fancied myself to be an okay snowboarder. And so I said, let's go to the fun park, where all the jumps and the rails are and everything like that. And so we're going down the hill. It's our first run down the fun park, and I thought, we'll ease into things. I'll go off the smallest jump. And it was quite small. And I went off that jump. I did like a little bit of a backside 180, it's like just whatever, it's a little thing. And then when I landed, I felt my left leg kind of give out a little bit behind me, and I fell back onto my backside, and it happens to the very best of us. And when I came to a stop, that's when I felt this sharp, excruciating pain emanating from my left lower leg, at which point I let out a blood-curdling scream to alert my friends that I was in some pain. And they came over and they said to me, hey bro, what's going on? And so that's when I let out another blood-curdling scream. And so one of them stayed with me, the other raced down to find the ski patrol, and the ski patrol comes up on their snowmobile with, one of those little stretchers on a sled being towed behind it. And they get there and they see me and they think, oh, this is like a 12-year-old kid, he's probably just being a bit dramatic. So the ski patrol guy says to me, he says, hey, buddy, I'm sure you're fine, probably just a strained calf muscle or something. You'll be back on the slopes in a couple of weeks. And I'm thinking, I don't know. And I say to him, I'm a little skeptical, like, this is pretty painful. And he said, you're fine, buddy. You don't mind if we pick you up by the legs and hands, do you? And we'll get you right onto the stretcher, at which point I let out another blood-curdling scream. And so they take me down to the medical lodge, and I'm sitting there, and I'm waiting for my parents to arrive. They called my parents, because why call an ambulance? It's obviously not a very serious injury. And they put this cardboard splint on my leg with some duct tape, and then they put me in the back of my parents' car, and even at that age, I was relatively tall, so I went down the highway for 25 minutes to the hospital with my left leg with an unknown at that point injury sticking out the rear window of my parents' car. And so we get to the hospital, and we get to the waiting room, and I think because of the sheer volume of noise I was producing in the waiting room, they wanted to get me through to see the doctor quite quickly. And so the nurse, she says, hey, we need to see the doctor, but we need to get your boot off first. We could probably, cut the laces off to really loosen it up, but I don't want to wreck your boot or anything, so we'll just loosen it up a little bit. You don't mind, do you? And before I could say, no, she just started reefing on my boot like this, at which point I let out another series of screams. Anyway, we went in to see the doctor after that, and I say to the doctor, I'm trying to be helpful. I say, the ski patrol guys, they thought, maybe just a strained calf muscle or something like that, but, I don't know, what do you think, doc? And the doctor just looks at my leg, and he looks at me, and he laughs, and he says, buddy, you've massively broken your leg. You're not going to be walking on this thing for the next few months. Now, I tell that story because even at that young age, when two grown men who should know better than me told me something that didn't quite make sense to me, I was pretty skeptical. Skepticism can be a really helpful thing. It's often the right thing. And in our modern world, we're typically skeptical people. And as that story illustrates, we're often right to be skeptical, whether it's a phishing email we get that says, hey, we'll get $5,000 if we just punch in our banking details, or we see an AI-generated video of Donald Trump playing in the NHL. We're right to be skeptical of things that don't quite make sense to us. In 1637, René Descartes wrote his famous Discourse on Method, where he penned the famous phrase, I think, therefore I am. And he was advocating for a methodological skepticism, doubting everything until we could prove with certainty what was actually true. And that methodological skepticism has been a powerful force ever since. It was foundational to the scientific revolution, and it's been instrumental to many discoveries in medicine and technology and other areas that have taken place since then. Skepticism, by and large, serves us well. We shouldn't naively take what we're told at face value. But it's also true that skeptical inquiry can't always lead you to certainty and to truth. It might get you part of the way there, but not all the way. I mean, sometimes we just don't have enough information to use our methodological skepticism to find the truth. There are lots of cold cases that our best detectives and forensic scientists have been unable to solve. Or maybe we're talking about the big transcendent questions of life, like, does God exist? Are there universal moral truths? Did Jesus of Nazareth actually rise from the dead 2,000 years ago? There's been a lot of ink of methodological skepticism spilt on that question over the last couple of hundred years. And do we have an answer to that? No, not with certainty. So when our most powerful tools of skeptical inquiry fail us, especially about the most important existential questions of human life, what are we supposed to do? Now, it's tempting to think that skepticism is a virtue peculiar to us modern people who are scientifically minded. But as we hear from the story in the Bible today, skepticism was alive and well in the time of Jesus, too. Even back then, everybody knew that people don't come back from the dead, especially when they've been dead for 3 days. And when people started to claim that Jesus had come back from the dead, even his closest friends and followers were very skeptical. But before we dive into our passage for today, it's worth zooming out just for a minute for a bit of context on what we're reading. The book of Luke, which is an eyewitness account of Jesus' life, is a story about Jesus of Nazareth, this peasant preacher from the rural areas north of Jerusalem who lived 2,000 years ago. And he claimed to be God's Messiah, sent to save the world. And just to rewind and recap the story of the book of Luke so far, Jesus has spent the last few years as a public figure, announcing this great news that God had finally come to make things right in the world, and that he, Jesus, was God's agent to bring about this wonderful change. Jesus gathered this large following, and then he made his way down to Jerusalem, the major political, religious, and cultural center of that region. And everybody there expected him to overthrow these unjust religious and political powers of that time and bring about a new regime of justice and peace that truly pleased God. But as we heard on Good Friday, that all came crashing down, at least in the eyes of his followers, when Jesus was sentenced to death and killed by crucifixion on a Roman cross outside the city. At this point, Jesus' followers assumed that the jig was up. There was no regime change coming, that God's justice and salvation were not about to arrive, and that it was all a tragic sham, that Jesus wasn't God's Messiah after all. And Jesus' closest friends and followers, they think he's dead, like for good. And for them, this is the crumbling of everything that they had put their hope in. They're in despair, anger, grief. It's all over. So a few days later, the women who were close friends and followers of Jesus head off to the tomb to embalm Jesus' body, which was customary. And they do this because, well, they think he's really dead. And they get there, and the stone is rolled away. And they're not like, oh man, yes, come back, kid, Jesus, he's the goat. I knew he had it in him. No, they're like, where is he? Somebody move him or something? And then all of a sudden, 2 angels appear. And they say, hey, he's alive. One of the greatest one-liners, well, it's not a one-liner, but anyway, one of the greatest lines in the Bible, in my opinion, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. And the angels go on to say, remember, this is what Jesus said would happen. And so the women go back to the other disciples and they say, hey, you wouldn't believe what just happened. Jesus has risen from the grave. He's alive. And the disciples say, did you see him? No? Fake news. People don't come back from the dead. But Peter, perhaps like a good scientist you might say, says, hey, I don't believe Jesus is back from the dead, but I don't think that there's nothing going on here. I mean, these women have clearly experienced something that's made quite an impression on them, and I want to find out what that is. And so he goes to the tomb, he sees the stone rolled away, Jesus' grave clothes folded inside, and he doesn't go away jumping to conclusions, thinking Jesus is alive. He's just amazed at what had happened. But of course, being amazed at what he had seen doesn't answer his questions about what actually happened here. He needs something more. And so he sticks around. He keeps asking questions. He says, hey, I'm not sure Jesus is alive, but there's something going on here. You see, Peter knows that looking for evidence at the tomb and listening to the stories of these women who claim Jesus is alive, that's only going to get him so far. If he tries to figure it all out like some ancient Sherlock Holmes with great powers of skeptical inquiry, he's never ultimately going to resolve the question, is Jesus alive? There's only one way for that question to be answered. Jesus has to reveal himself to Peter. And do you know what? That's exactly what Jesus does. We read later in this chapter, after some time had passed, some days had gone by, the disciples are back together again, and then this happens. It says, while they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost, because none of them thought he was actually alive. He said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and feet. See that it is I, myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. In other words, Jesus is alive. He's really alive, like physically alive. He's eating fish with the homies. And don't just take their word for it. Another early Christian writer, the Apostle Paul, someone who himself didn't believe in Jesus until Jesus showed himself to Paul. He writes this letter to an early Christian community to encourage them in their faith. He says this, he says, "For I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins according with the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. And then he appeared to Cephas," means Peter, "then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died." Like Paul is writing, and keep in mind, this is a real historical letter from Paul. Even the most skeptical historians don't dispute that. And he's saying, like, hundreds of people saw Jesus alive. You can go talk to them. Ask them for yourself. You see, when it comes to the empty tomb of Jesus, there's not nothing going on here. It would be naive to say that. And even some of the most skeptical, cynical atheists would say so. Alex O'Connor, the internet's maybe most up-and-coming young atheist, he himself said this, "Maybe the disciples are lying, but you don't tend to go to death for something that you know to be a lie. Maybe they were hallucinating, but you don't really get group hallucinations like this. I mean, hundreds of people. So if they weren't mistaken, and they weren't making it up, what explains the fact that they had claimed to see him after he had died? It is weird. Something very strange seems to have happened on that morning. It's weird. There's nothing to see here. But our very best skeptical inquiry, it's not going to discern everything that happened on that morning, not all on its own. At the end of the day, Jesus has to reveal himself to us. And many people, not just those early disciples, but many people claim to this day that Jesus has revealed himself to them. So why does Jesus seem to reveal himself to some people and not to others? Why do some people seem to encounter Jesus and others don't? Well, I think this story shows us that the people who encounter Jesus or claim that they have are those people who don't dismiss Jesus and Christian faith as a bunch of naive superstition. Nor are they the kind of people who might think, yeah, there's probably something going on here, but I can't quite figure it out, and so they kind of just move on. They can't be bothered to dig deeper. They just stop seeking to understand what's going on. The people who encounter Jesus are those people, like Peter, who say, Jesus, there's something going on here with your death and resurrection. And I can't fully understand it. I don't fully know what's going on. But I'm going to keep investigating, keep trying to understand, keep praying, keep gathering with God's people, and trust that as I do so, if you're really there, you're going to show yourself to me. And like Jesus has done for those disciples in our story today, And like he has for so many millions upon billions of Christians since that time, Jesus does seem to reveal himself to people, to show himself to those who diligently seek him. Because in the end, our very best skepticism can't answer the most important questions about God and life and Jesus and whether Jesus rose from the dead. The truth, it's just outside of our grasp. It has to be revealed to us. And as we seek Jesus out, so often he does reveal himself to us. Why? Because he's alive. You might be here today and you're new to church, or maybe back from church after some time away, or maybe you're like, man, I only come on Christmas and Easter and I just want to sing a few songs and get out of here. Can you wrap it up, Nathan? Wherever you're coming from this morning, if you take one thing from this message, take this. You should absolutely use your God-given rational abilities to investigate and understand what happened that Easter day. Read the best Christian arguments for Jesus' resurrection, the best anti-Christian arguments against it. Reason is a good thing. Skeptical inquiry is a good thing. Don't park your brain at the door when it comes to church and faith. That's not what this is all about. But don't think that rational investigation alone will get you all the way to certainty one way or another. It won't. At the end of the day, our only hope is for the truth somehow to reveal itself to us. And the good news is that if you say, hey, Jesus, I'm not sure what to think about this. But I'm going to look a little deeper. I'm going to keep praying, coming to church, investigating, trusting that if you're there, you're going to show yourself to me, that he will, because he is not dead, but is risen and is alive forever and ever. So if you're here today looking for Jesus or you're not looking for Jesus, there's not nothing to see here. It's not an idle tale. Quite the opposite. There's the most important event at the center of the universe to see here. And it's incumbent upon anyone who wants the truth to seek it out. So keep seeking. Try praying. Come join us next Sunday. This is a place for everybody, full of faith, full of doubt, anywhere in between. Your questions are welcome here. We've got newcomer night after the service next week, pizza and beer afterwards. What's not to love? Come for Jesus, stay for the pizza and beer. Or maybe it's supposed to be the other way around, whatever. Because those who seek him will find him. Be careful around church. You might just find God here. And there's no greater treasure to find than the risen Jesus who loved us and gave himself for us. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, but is risen. Happy Easter. Amen.